When I married James, I told myself I was making the safe choice. He was steady, kind, and dependable. The kind of man who never forgot to lock the door, who called his mom every Sunday, and who made sure the gas tank was never below half. I thought stability was what I needed, but deep down, I knew I wanted more than that. I wanted passion, chaos, the kind of love that burns. So instead of treating James like the blessing he was, I treated him like a placeholder. The truth is, he was my first husband, but he was never my first choice. I met James through a mutual friend in college. He wasn't flashy, not the kind of guy who walked into a room and had everyone's head turn. He was just James. Sweet, thoughtful, and always willing to help. When I locked my keys in my car once, he drove an hour just to bring me his spare kit. When I was sick, he showed up with soup and stayed until I fell asleep. He never made me chase him, never played games, never made me doubt his feelings. And maybe that's why I took him for granted. We dated for 3 years before he proposed. I remember when he got down on one knee in front of my family, holding out a simple gold band, his hands shaking but his eyes steady. My family clapped, my mom cried, and I smiled for the pictures. But deep down, there was no explosion of joy. I wasn't crying out of happiness. I was crying because I knew the truth, James loved me more than I loved him. But instead of admitting it, I told myself love doesn't have to be fireworks. Love can be safety. Love can be comfort. So I said yes. Our wedding was small and beautiful. He cried during his vows, and I forced my voice to stop shaking long enough to get through mine. Everyone told me how lucky I was, how James was the kind of man women dream of marrying. And I smiled and nodded, because what else could I do? At the time, I thought, even if I don't feel the spark, at least I'll never be alone. But that thought haunted me every single day of our marriage. James was a good husband. Better than I deserved. He did the laundry, cooked dinner on nights I worked late, and always kissed me goodbye before leaving for the office. But instead of appreciating him, I picked at everything. He wasn't spontaneous enough. He wasn't passionate enough. He wasn't exciting. He wanted quiet nights and when I wanted adventure. He wanted a family when I wanted to keep finding myself. I made him feel like he was never enough, and I knew it. Then one night, I crossed a line. I went out with some friends from work, and one of them brought his cousin, Mark. Mark was the exact opposite of James. Loud, charming, full of stories, the kind of man who made you feel like the only person in the room when he looked at you. He flirted with me all night, and I let him. When I got home, James was asleep on the couch, waiting up for me with a blanket draped over him. I looked at him. This man who loved me, who never asked for anything but my time and attention. And instead of feeling guilty, I felt trapped. I told myself I wasn't cheating, just harmlessly flirting. But the truth is, emotionally, I already had one foot out the door. And it didn't take long before it turned physical. Mark and I had an affair for 3 months. James never suspected a thing because that's who he was. Trusting, loyal, the kind of man who would never believe the worst of me. He thought I was working late. He thought I was just stressed. Meanwhile, I was sneaking around with another man who didn't even know my middle name. It ended the night James found my phone on the counter while I was in the shower. Mark had sent me a message, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." James didn't say anything at first. He just handed me the phone when I walked out, his face pale. "Is there something you need to tell me?" he asked. My mouth went dry. I tried to lie at first, said it was just a coworker being inappropriate. But James wasn't stupid. He had already read enough. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He just said quietly, "I've given you everything I could." I guess it wasn't enough. He packed a bag that night and left. Within a week, he filed for divorce. I thought he'd come back. I thought once the anger faded, he'd realize how much he loved me and forgive me. That was the kind of man James was. Steady, forgiving, too good for his own sake. But this time I had pushed him too far. He never came back. The divorce was quick. I didn't fight him on anything. I didn't deserve to. He kept the apartment, the furniture, everything we had built together. I walked away with nothing but a few boxes of clothes and a gnawing hole in my chest that only grew deeper as time went on. For the first year, I convinced myself he was miserable without me. I told myself he was probably lonely, regretting the decision, maybe even dating women who would never measure up to me. But then I saw a picture of him online. He was smiling, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize, his arm around her shoulders. She was beautiful, and not in a flashy way. Beautiful in that calm, radiant way that made her look like the kind of woman who would never betray him. It's been 3 years since the divorce, and James is still with her. They just got engaged. She posted a picture of the ring, and it's nicer than the one he gave me. The caption read, "Can't wait to spend forever with my best friend." And James commented, "Forever isn't long enough." That's when it hit me. He never wrote anything like that for me. He never looked at me the way he looks at her in those photos. And it's not because he didn't have it in him. It's because I never let him. I never gave him the space to love me the way he wanted, because I was too busy wishing he was someone else. Now I'm 33, divorced, broke, and scrolling through his engagement pictures while sitting alone in a one-bedroom apartment I can barely afford. I thought I'd be remarried by now, maybe even have kids. Instead, I'm single and invisible. People tell me I'll find someone else, but the truth is, I don't think I will. Not because I don't deserve love, but because I already had the best man I'll ever meet, and I let him slip away. I traded safety for excitement, loyalty for chaos, love for lust. And in the end, the only person who got burned was me. James got his happy ending. And I got the lesson, sometimes the safe choice is actually the best choice. Sometimes the man you think is boring is the one who would have built you a life full of love and stability. And sometimes, when you're too blind to see it, you don't just lose a husband. You lose the one person who would have loved you through everything. Now, every time I see them together, smiling and building the future I could have had, I remind myself of one brutal truth: James was my first husband. But he was never my first choice. And that's why I'll never be his last.